what's up everyone? Today is, as you can see here, part one really of a group of lessons we're going to do on, as you can see up here, el subjuntivo, or really we're going to focus on, there's the past and the present subjunctive, but this one's going to be on the present subjunctive. But I just kind of wrote it up there as the subjunctive, but to be specific, we're looking at the present subjunctive. So it's, so today we're focusing on el subjuntivo, right? And that's, as I said, it's the present subjunctive, and now you're at a point where you'll have to distinguish between the present indicative and the present subjunctive. Now they're used differently, and that's something we'll get into later when we look at what we'll call the indicative versus the subjunctive, right? Because you're going to use, in Spanish, you have reasons for using one over the other. And so that's for a different lesson. Today, really, as I said, is part one of a series of lessons, but this is just a basic intro into how to conjugate verbs into the subjunctive. That's it. And so, again, we'll have follow-up videos that are looking at how to use it in sentences, and we'll look at the subjunctive and how it works with commands. But again, this is just a brief intro into how to conjugate a verb in the subjunctive. And so, if you're watching on YouTube and you're not part of our class, feel free to hit the subscribe button or the like button or one of the buttons that'll let you know when new videos are available, so you can follow us on this lesson and any other lesson you want for that matter. So, but anyways, like I said, today we just want to focus on the how-to, and here are the 3 steps, right? I'm just going to get right on into it. The 3 steps on how to conjugate a verb into the subjunctive. And keep in mind, we're only talking about ones that are not irregular, right? And I've got a little list of different a variety of ways that, of course, verbs in the indicative, present indicative, are conjugated. And I'm going to show you how the subjunctive works with that. But again, what we're talking about today are what would be defined as, quote unquote, the regular subjunctive. In other words, all of the examples I'm going to give you follow these rules. Now, there are irregulars in the subjunctive, but that's not for today. So as I said, it's just a basic intro into how to do this. So again, let's take a look. So the first thing you want to do is you want to conjugate whatever verb you're talking about. Of course, if it's an irregular, it doesn't follow these rules. But these are going to be some examples we'll look at so you can see what I'm talking about. But you're going to conjugate the verb in the first person singular of the present indicative. Now, that's the yo form, the I form. First person singular is yo, I. Right, and then of the present indicative. And so up until now, when we talk of present tense, it's been the present indicative. So, and again, we'll have a look over there, and it'll make sense what I'm talking about. And so, again, first person singular present indicative. The second step, right, because they're going to end with an O, then you just drop the letter O off of the back of that. And then you would add what I'm calling the opposite endings. Now, there's other ways of referring to this right here, but I'm referring to this as the opposite endings. In other words, if it's an AR verb, right, and I'll just give you an example right here. If it's, for example, bailar, to dance, you're going to use what would have been the ER endings in the present tense. So that's why I call it the opposite endings. And so for these, if it's an AR verb, what you will add once you drop the O is going to be this. And of course, you want to make it agree with the subject. So we have amos, ace, and then ene, right? And so as, you can say as or as, right? I mean, obviously, we're just talking about endings. So the the es, amos, and then this is vosotros, eis, and then en, so that en, sorry, en. So that's the en, which would be third person plural, of course. And so again, over here, if it's an ER or an IR verb, so for example, if it's vivir or comer or really any of the other ones you see here that are ERs or IRs, once you go through step 1 and 2, first person singular present indicative, je, you drop the O, rule number 2, and then you add your opposite endings, right? And again, like I said, there's other ways of referring to this, but it just makes sense to call it the opposite endings, for me at least, right? And so we have isa, amos, ais, ene, right? Or aasa, amos, I like to say amos, right? And then ais, or ais, and then ane, or an, whatever, right? But those are the endings, and you can pronounce them sort of sitting there however you want, because they're going to be added to a word, a verb, and then it's going to take on a different sort of pronunciation, if you will, right? But hopefully that makes sense right there, that just the use of the term opposite ending. So if it's an AR verb, you'd add these endings, which of course in the present indicative would not be AR verb endings. So that's also what helps you know that the subjunctive is being used, right? And likewise over here, ER and IR endings are taking what would be in the present indicative AR endings. So it is abundantly clear in a sense that you're not using the present indicative and you are in fact using the subjunctive, right? But the reason for that will be on a different lesson. So, but again, like I said today, let's just look at how we do this. And so we've got a set of examples here, ejemplos, and I've broken it down the best I can, right? Because as we learned present indicative, we learned, the first lesson was, regular AR, ER, IR verbs. One of the next lessons was irregular jo verbs, right? And we have videos for that as well. Then we learned stem changers, right? We had the U to UE, the O to UE, the E to IE, the E to I, all those different stem changers that took place in the present indicative, right? And then, then we learned, when we learned the preterite, we got into Kargar's R, but that's going to sort of come back and get used again. That concept is going to get used again with the subjunctive because of the nature of that combination. For example, the QUE, and in other words, the combination of letters you saw with the Jo form of the Kargar Zars and the preterite match up pretty well with the way the combination of letters will be with the subjunctive. But anyways, like I said, once I start doing the examples, it'll make a lot more sense. I'm just sort of creating the context for you all. And most importantly, like I said, how they're how you get through the stages of conjugating these verbs into the subjunctive. So before I go over there, I just want to run through this again, just as a review. First person singular present indicative, jo form. Drop the letter O, which would be on the back end, and then you add your opposite endings, which again are right here. And so let's have a look at bailar. We're going to start with bailar. Now I'm not going to conjugate all of them in all of the subjunctive forms, but I will walk through it in a way that helps you all sort of grasp what we're talking about. And so I started up here with regular AR, ER, and IR verbs because those are, those were some of the easier ones, particularly when we started learning how to conjugate verbs. And that was, essentially drop off the AR, ER, or IR, and then add appropriate endings. So, bailar, following our rules here, bailar for Jo would be bailo, right? And so we get bailo, right? We drop the O, right? That's our step 2. And then we add the opposite ending. And so it would be baile, right? Now, then you would run through all of the conjugations that you see here. And I'll just write it here just so you can see what I'm talking about. So you do, let's spell that right. Baile, try to spell this right. Bailes, baile, right? And then we're over here. Bailemos, vosotros, bailes, right? That's a dot there, that's an accent there, and then baile. And so, in much of the same way the present indicative has its set of conjugations, the present subjunctive also has its set of conjugations. And that's, like I said, that's what I want to work on today. So here are all the conjugations for bailar. So you have jo baile, and notice that it's not baile, that's the preterite. right? And that's a big difference, right? So it doesn't have an accent, so it's pronounced differently. So baile, bailes, baile, bailemos, bailes, baile, right? And so, like I said, we have yo, tú, usted, él, ella, nosotros, vosotros, ustedes, ellos, ellas, right? So, yeah, so that's an example of a regular AR verb in the subjunctive, right? And so let's move on over here and just have a look at this one as well. I want to walk through them all. And so vivir becomes vivo, right? We drop the O, we add the opposite ending. It's an IR verb, so we're gonna be over here. So we're gonna add an A to it, so it'd be viva, right? And so, as I said, now you're working with this group of conjugations. You have viva, vivas, viva, vivamos, vivais, vivan, right? And so that's how that would work for vivir. Comer is going to be similar because it's an ER verb, so it's going to take these same endings. So we have yo como, we drop the O, and then again, we add these opposite endings. So we would have coma, for example, comas, coma, comamos, comais, coman, right? And so that's, again, that's for these three, which are regular AR, ER, IR verbs. Now, one of a very common mistake for a lot of people that are learning this, at least learning how to conjugate it, they say, well, yeah, but Jason, like honestly, I see baile, it just looks like I drop off the AR and add the opposite ending. And yes, for these that are regular verbs, it does seem like that should be the case. However, as we get to some of these, I'll show you how that's not going to work and why that's not the right way to go about it. And so even though you have regular AR, ER, IR verbs, you still got to follow these rules. And really, if you skip rule number 1, which is the first person singular, the jo form, you're gonna actually mess up the whole series of conjugations. So that's really a really important rule that you don't want to miss. And so let me just show you an example of what I'm talking about. And this is sort of a classic, right? So I'm moving into the irregular jo. So like in the present indicative, hacer and poner are, among others, of course, are irregular jo verbs. So for hacer, it would be hago, right? And then we would drop the O, and then we add our opposite endings. And hacer is an ER verb, so we add these endings. So it would be haga, right? And I'll come back over here. Haga, hagas, haga, hagamos, hagais, hagan, right? And so that's how you do that in the subjunctive. Right now, let's just say, for example, you decide you don't want to follow rule number 1. You're like, Jason, nah, that doesn't work. So it's easy to see when you don't do that. And let me just show you what that would look like. So let's just say you say, you know what, hey Jason, I'm not following rule number 1, right? I'm going to drop the ending, because that's really what it looks like you keep doing. So I'm just going to drop the ending, and I'm going to add the opposite ending, because hey, I know that ERs take opposite endings. All right, and so let's see what that looks like. You would do aka, right? And that would be wrong. And so you would run through here and do aka, akas, aka, akamos, and it'd be totally wrong. And that's because you ignored rule number 1. Rule number 1 is going to give you ago, and then from there you run through it, right? And so poner is going to work the same way. So let's just not follow our rules. So I'm just going to drop the ending off, it's whatever. It's an ER verb, so I'm going to add the opposite. And so you get pona. That's wrong. And let me show you what the actual one should be, right? And so, as you all know, poner in the jo form, in the present indicative, is pongo, right? So we have pongo. So one of our go verbs, right alongside hacer. Let me make sure we know that's wrong, by the way. So we do pongo, and then we drop our O, right? So we drop our O, and then we add our opposite endings. So we get ponga, pongas, and so on and so forth, right? And so that's how that works with irregular jo verbs, right? Notice that step 1 is pretty critical, because if you mess that up, you don't acknowledge the irregular jo, and then you would just conjugate it incorrectly in the subjunctive. So, like I said, be mindful of that. And again, I know I've already put an asterisk and an arrow, and I mean, I'll just circle it too, because remember that rule number 1, all right? So let's move along. Let's take a look at just, this is sort of a segue, right? But I'm gonna look at this stem changer, poder. Jugad is also a stem changer. But let's look at poder as an O-to-U-E stem changer, right? And so this is, remember with the stem changers in the present indicative, you had the boot, right? And so that's gonna actually it's gonna do effectively the same thing. It's just gonna have its subjunctive version. So I got poder here, so let's have a look at poder. So poder becomes yo puedo, right? You guys knew that, right? And then we drop the O, right? Again, we're working with an ER verb, so we're gonna add the opposite endings, right? So we have pueda, right? And I'm gonna go ahead and draw a boot, because I'm gonna actually use this space for it. And we can erase it if we need to. But we have pueda, and then we're gonna add all of these. Now, what's interesting about the boot, in much of the same way you get this with the present indicative, you're gonna get it with the subjunctive. So they actually act the same when it comes to this, right? And so you have puedas, right? You have, and then pueda, I guess I didn't need all that room for it. And then you have, we're outside the boot, so and that means we do not stem change. So we get podamos, right? We're still doing the subjunctive. We're just not stem changing. And then you have here vosotros, podais, right? It's not podais, it's podais, right? And so, again, we're outside the boot, and then we come back inside the boot for puedan, right? And so notice these are all stem changed, and then outside the boot doesn't stem change. And so that stem changers actually work very similarly in the subjunctive as they do in the present indicative, or the present subjunctive and present indicative, sorry. And so that, it's just one is the subjunctive and one is the indicative, right? But the boot idea, the boot concept still is there. So I'm actually just gonna erase this, and we're gonna put jugad in there. Now jugad, actually I'm just gonna go ahead and erase all this, because jugad is working as my segue here, right? It's sort of segueing into these, as I have here, kargarzar, right? So jugad, as you all know, is a U to UE stem change, but it's also a kargarzar in the preterite. And so both of those are gonna sort of come together here. And again, let me just show you how that's gonna work. So we have jugad becomes juego, right? We know that, yo juego. We drop the O, and this is where the kargarzar comes in. So we drop the O, and let's just do it sort of step by step, right? We drop the O, and now you add your opposite ending. We know it's jugad, it's an AR verb, so we would add an E. Like I said, the kargarzar idea comes in play. So we don't just add an E, we add a UE, right? And so now you have stem changer and kargarzar sort of coming together in the subjunctive. And so again, we have our fancy boot, right? We even put some shoestrings on it. And so we have juegue, and then we have juegues, right? Juegue. And then again, we're outside the boot, so we do juguemos, right? So look, the U doesn't stem change, right? And so, and then we have jugues, right? Right, so that's coming from here, and then, right, it's not juegues, right? You don't do the stem change, so you just do it's outside the boot, so you don't stem change. And then we do jueguen, right? So we go back in the boot and we get jueguen, right? And so as you can see, as we move through here, some of these take a little bit more TLC than others. And also, again, you've got to remember your first rule, the Jo form, right? And so, again, so let's look at Sakada. This was our transition or segue into the kargarzars. Now, jugad is sort of on both, right? It's a stem changer and it's also a kargarzar. which is why it's probably of the bunch up here so far, one of the strangest ones. And so I'm going to go ahead and erase this. All right, let's go ahead and get rid of that. And then let's move on to Sakada, right? Sakada is a car zar, it's a car, right? And so we have, again, let's look at the steps. Sako, right? We drop the O, we add the opposite ending E, but because it's that CE combo, like you saw in the preterite, right? That same change is gonna have to happen. So the C changes to QUE. Now the difference between the stem changer cargars are like jugad and this one is there's no boot. There's no need for a boot. You're just gonna run all the way through with this. So you'll have sake, sakes, sake, sakemos, right? For example. And then we have sakes and then sake, for example. And so you don't do the boot because there's no stem changer here, right? As you all know, Sakada isn't a stem changer. And you do the same for abrazar, right? Abrazar is going to be abrazo. Drop the O, we add the opposite ending, which is an E, but just like abrazar in the preterite becomes, in the preterite case, abrace, right? You're gonna do the same change, of course. We just don't have an accent over it. So it'd be abrace, right? Notice that sound change, right? Preterite is abrace, I hugged. Abrace is hug, right, in the subjunctive, so no accent. So then you would do abrace, abraces, right? And then I'm just kind of hopping around. Abracemos, abracen, right? And so no stem change there, but you do the change here on the backside. Dormir and morir are, again, they're strange in much of the same way jugad is going to have, like, it's sort of extra change, right? And so I put these up here at the end because they're similar, and we'll just do dormir, and you'll understand what morir would be because they conjugate effectively the same way. So dormir becomes duermo, right? Duermo. We drop the O. We add our opposite ending, duerma, right? So it is a stem change, O to UE, and then we walk through this, right? Duermas. Duerma, right? And I'm using these right here because it's an IR verb, right? And so we have, I'm going to go ahead and draw our boot. Then we have durmamos, right? Notice that, right? So while it is outside the boot, it still makes a slight tweak in the stem, right? It actually does what your preterite does with this verb in the third person singular and plural. So you can start to see some patterns in how these little changes actually resurface in other conjugations, or other tenses, I should say. And so this is a good one, right? Turmais, right? And then duerman, right? And so there you go. That's how you would do dormir. Now, again, morir would be the exact same way. I mean, you could just erase the D and put an M, and you would have the conjugations for morir. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, that was a sort of a wide-ranging approach to how to conjugate what we're going to call regular verbs in the present subjunctive. And the reason I'm using that term, regular verbs in the present subjunctive, is because irregular verbs are going to come with their own set of ways of conjugating, and so they're not going to work like this, right? And so you'll have a sort of a different set of rules, if you will, because they're irregular. They just have their own set of rules. And so, but these are, while you do see a wide range here, you have regular verbs, right? You have irregular jo. You have stem changers. We have the car zar, and then we have, I call this stem changer no boot. I don't know why I called it that, because it does do the boot. It just does a little change here. So it does mind the boot. It just doesn't. It still does a slight stem change tweak, right? So just be aware of that. And yeah, that's pretty much it for part one.